preparatory stuff that I'm going to have to read as we get into this meeting. We've got some clear direction from our Office of the Attorney General about the disclaimers that we need to make sure are read before we get into this new world of virtual board meetings, at least new for this particular board. So we'll ask your forbearance there. Would like to acknowledge Secretary Ring. I see you on the video, so good morning. Thanks for joining us. And certainly thanks to all of our folks with state agencies, particularly the Department of Conservation and Recreation, Subha Kaya and her team, and Clyde's folks for pulling this all together. It's a heavy lift to get prepared for any board meeting, but certainly one, in a virtual format that we're not used to. So there will be, I think, perhaps some things that take a little bit more time in this meeting than they do in the ones that we have in person to work through, and that's okay. We want to make sure that we get everything right, and we've got time built in for public comment as well, since we know that transparency is really important to this process. So with that, I will get started reading through some of this. I'll go ahead and call the meeting to order. And we'll just note that, generally, as you know, public bodies are prohibited from meeting electronically under our FOIA code in Virginia. However, there was emergency legislation that was passed by the General Assembly and approved by the governor in April, which allows us to move forward under certain restrictions. I mentioned the board meeting will be open for public comment. And that we provided an announcement with instructions for folks who wish to speak about the grant manual or general public comment. I have asked folks to reach out to Mike Fletcher at HPR. We hope people have done that so that they can for public comment. If they haven't, we are going to allow folks to just write in the chat box that they wish to make a comment, and we'll acknowledge folks as time permits, kind of in the order that they come in. The language that I'm required to read aloud per statute is Chapter 1283 of the 2020 Acts of Assembly, also known as the Caboose Bill, includes language addressing the ability of public bodies to conduct electronic meetings without the need for a quorum being present in a single physical location, otherwise known as an electronic meeting. This language was submitted as an amendment by the governor and approved by the General Assembly at their April 22, 2020 reconvened session. The governor subsequently signed the Caboose Bill, and the bill is effective as of April 24, 2020. The Caboose Bill allows public bodies to hold electronic meetings when the governor has declared a state of emergency pursuant to the Code of Virginia, Section 44-146.17, if 1, the nature of the declared emergency makes it impracticable or unsafe for the public body or governing board to assemble in a single location. 2, the purpose of the meeting is to discuss or transact the business statutorily required or necessary to continue operations of the public body and the discharge of its lawful purposes, duties, and responsibilities pursuant to Section 4.0 or 4-0.01G of the Code. The Caboose Bill also has language regarding recordings and transcripts of electronic meetings. Please be advised that this meeting is being recorded. This recording will be available to public through the DCR website. The comments in the chat room will also be preserved as a public record. Official minutes of the meeting will be drafted and posted in accordance with regular procedures. The Caboose Bill does not allow the board to hold an electronic meeting to discuss or transact business for any purpose at all. Rather, they may do so as long as the agenda items the public body plans to take up are A, statutorily required, or B, necessary to continue operations and discharge lawful purposes, duties, and responsibilities. It is the board's responsibility to determine whether the nature of the declared emergency makes it impracticable or unsafe for the public body or governing board to assemble in a single location. So at the conclusion of these remarks, I'm going to ask for a motion for the board to make this determination. We feel that it is the right determination to make. We have consulted with our lawyers who agree. But if that motion fails, this electronic meeting will end at that point. Very important to note. So if we want to have a meeting today, we need to go ahead and pass that motion. So this bill requires compliance with the provisions of Code of Virginia Section 2.2-3708.2. Therefore, in accordance with that section, public bodies must include a telephone number that may be used to notify the public body of any interruption in the telephone or video broadcast of this meeting. In the event that a disruption occurs, participants should contact phone or text at 804-317-8934. Again, that number is 804-317-8934. Additionally, if there is an interruption in the broadcast, the meeting must be suspended until public access is restored. Those provisions of the Virginia Freedom of Information Act are not addressed by the bill remain in effect. Before we continue with the business portion of the meeting, I'll ask Mr. Fletcher to call the roll for board members and any anticipated staff. Other participants will be recorded. So if you're participating by phone, your name is not called, please call or text Mike Fletcher at the number that I provided. In addition, anytime you lose connection and are unable to reconnect, reach out to Mike as well at the same number. Mike, I'll now turn it over to you for roll call.
Thank you. Secretary Strickland.
Present.
Mr. Lazaro.
Present.
Secretary Ring.
Present.
Mr. Pollard. Mr. Pollard.
He's muted. He's waving.
Okay, we see you waving. Mr. Ford.
Present.
Ms. Stiff.
Present.
Ms. Donner. Mr. Volk.
Present.
Dr. Casey.
Present.
Ms. Imhoff.
Present.
Ms. Booth.
Present.
Mr. Presley.
Present.
Mr. Woodley.
Present.
Senator Marson.
Present.
Senator Vogel. Ms. Andrews.
Present.
Mr. Beamer.
Here.
Mr. Jennison.
Present.
Ms. Powell. Mr. Secretary, you do have a quorum.
Great, Mike. Thank you for that. The next thing I'm going to do is to present to you all a recommended motion to allow us to move forward with the meeting. And the members to request the recommended motion is the Virginia Land Conservation Foundation Board of Trustees certifies that the nature of the declared COVID-19 emergency makes it impracticable or unsafe for the board to assemble in a single location, and further, that the agenda items to be taken up at this meeting are necessary to continue operations and discharge lawful purposes, duties, and responsibilities of the board.
Move approval, Mr. Chairman. This is Bob Livero.
Seconded by Jim Casey.
All right, great. All in favor, say aye.
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 Nay?
I'm going to mute it. Excuse me, Mr. Secretary?
Yeah.
Mr. Secretary? According to FOIA, all of the votes, including this one, need to be by roll call. So any action that we take needs to be roll call.
All right, let's do a roll call.
Okay. Mr. Pollard?
Aye.
Mr. Ford?
Aye.
Ms. Stiff?
Aye.
Mr. Volk?
Aye.
Dr. Casey?
Aye.
Imhoff?
Aye.
Booth?
Aye.
Mr. Presley?
Aye.
Mr. Woodley?
Aye.
Senator Marson?
Aye.
Andrews?
Aye.
Mr. Beamer?
Yes.
Mr. Jennison?
Aye.
Secretary Ring?
Aye.
Mr. Lazaro?
Aye.
Secretary Strickland? Secretary, the motion carries.
Thank you. So now I'll just explain quickly a little bit about how we're going to handle participation by board member, staff, and the public. Everyone except the person who is presenting materials for an agenda item should make sure that they are muted. Once the presentation is complete, the board members and only the board members will be unmuted for discussion. The staff is going to assist with making sure the board members are recognized when they have questions or comments, and as needed, staff can unmute, will be unmuted themselves to address any of those questions or comments. Members of the public will be able to ask questions and provide input using the chat box function only, as I mentioned before, except for those who registered for the public comment agenda items beforehand, and as time allows, we'll get to the questions in the chat box. If there are no questions with that, we'll proceed to the business of the board, which is outlined in the agenda. Okay. Quickly, the first thing I'd like to do now that we're into the business portion of the meeting is recognize our new members or new appointees. We've got several to welcome and really appreciate you all joining us. Those members are Senator David Marsden, Elizabeth Andrews, James Beamer, Andrew Jennison, and Sonia Powell. Thank you all so much for being here today, and certainly for agreeing to serve on the Land Conservation Foundation Board. A very important responsibility and something that's very important to the governor as well, and we really appreciate your time and your service and your expertise. The next order of business here is to elect a new vice chair. Mr. Lazzaro's second term on the board is coming to an end, and he's offered to, or has ended, he's offered to remain on the board until his replacement is named. He served as the vice chair for the past few years, and we need to update this annually. So now is, I think, the appropriate time to elect a new vice chair, and I wanted to throw it out and see if there are any nominations from the board members.
Mr. Secretary, first, thank you so much, Bob, for your service. I would like to nominate Mary Carr. I'm not sure if I got cut off there.
You did a little bit, Jay, if you could just repeat that.
Yeah, I would like to nominate Mary Carson for vice chair.
Okay, are there any other nominations or discussion on that nomination or a second?
This is Bob. I'm sorry, this is Bob. I second it.
Okay, before we take that to a roll call, Mary Carson, are you okay with that?
Yes, I'm okay with that. How are you, Secretary? Thanks, Jay.
Doing well, thank you. Any further discussion on that before we go to a vote? All right, Mike, would you please call the roll?
Mr. Pollard?
Yeah, yes.
Mr. Ford?
Aye.
Ms. Stiff?
Aye.
Mr. Volk?
Aye.
Dr. Casey?
Aye.
Imhoff?
Aye.
Booth?
Aye.
Mr. Presley? Mr. Presley? Mr. Woodley? Mr. Woodley?
Aye. Aye.
Senator Marsden?
Aye.
Ms. Andrews?
Aye.
Mr. Beamer? Mr. Beamer? Mr. Jennison?
Aye.
Secretary Ring?
Aye.
Mr. Lazzaro?
Aye.
Secretary Strickler?
Aye.
Mr. Secretary, the motion carries.
Great. Thanks, Mike. Thanks, Mary Carson, for agreeing to serve in this role, and Bob, certainly thank you for all your work on the foundation board in general, and then the capacity as vice chair in particular. And thanks to everybody for getting through those items. The last business item we have before we get into the meat of the agenda is the approval of the minutes from the last board meeting, which incredibly was on November 22nd of 2019. Do I have a motion to approve the minutes as presented?
So moved. Ms. Lazara.
It's Mr. Woodley, second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Mike, please call the roll.
Yes, sir. Mr. Pollard?
Yes.
Mr. Ford?
Yes.
Ms. Stiff?
Yes.
Mr. Volk?
Yes.
Dr. Casey?
Yes.
Ms. Imhoff?
Abstain as I was not present.
Ms. Booth?
Yes.
Mr. Presley?
Yes.
Mr. Woodley?
Yes.
Senator Marsden?
Yes.
Ms. Andrews?
Abstain. I was not at the meeting.
Mr. Beamer? Mr. Jennison?
Yes.
Secretary Ring?
Yes.
Mr. Lazaro?
Yes.
Secretary Strickland? Mr. Secretary, the motion carries.
Great, thank you. Before we move on, I want to recognize Kat Imhoff. I know that your appointment was a while ago now. I believe this is your first board meeting with us, so thank you for agreeing to serve, and it's good to finally get you at one of these meetings. All right, I will now pass this over to DCR staff to hear about a few recently closed foundation grant awards and the current status of the LCF funds. Then we'll take care of a few financial tasks we need to get through per the code. So Susan Bolkai, will you take it from here, please?
Hi. Can you hear me okay?
I can.
Okay. There were 4 grants that have some feedback happening here. I don't know if that's us. Okay.
Make sure if you're not Stu, please mute your microphone.
Yeah, if everyone could mute, that might help out here. Thank you. There's 4 projects that have closed since we last met in November.
So I'm not getting any audio from you. I'm not sure if others are having the same problem.
Mr. Chair, I think when Mike muted everyone, he muted Sue too, maybe.
He's trying to fix that.
Okay. Okay, can you hear me now? Okay.
Yes.
I don't know if people on the phone can hear me. Okay, so the phone is muted here in our office. All right, that seems to have taken care of the feedback. Sorry. The first here, can you guys?
Sounds better.
Okay, awesome. Thank you. Because I can't see anyone because I'm just looking at the document on my screen. The Roanoke County project was a great public access project that provides parking facilities and trails and connects to great existing features in Roanoke County. And although this and the next two projects were approved before Conserve Virginia was in existence, they all fall within a layer or 2 or 3 of Conserve Virginia. This project falls within the natural habitat and ecosystem diversity layer of Conserve Virginia. Most of the property is protected by the county by a deed of declaration of open space, and about 34 acres of the property are protected by a VOF easement. The next project that successfully closed was completed in May of this year, and this was a American Battlefield Trust project that was about 12 acres of battlefield, and falls within the cultural and historic preservation layer and the scenic preservation layer of Conserve Virginia. This project is protected with the DHR easement and protects all of those battlefield resources. The white easement is a Department of Forestry easement on about 618 acres, excuse me. And it has over 1.5 miles of frontage on the Meherrin River. And you can see that our grant award of $50,000 was matched way more than 1-to-1. And this great project conserves natural habitat and ecosystem diversity resources and floodplains and flooding resilience within Conserve Virginia. And the final project that we closed on back in February was a Northern Virginia Conservation Trust acquisition with a DCR Natural Heritage easement and a deed of dedication for a natural area, and it protects the natural habitat and ecosystem diversity layer, floodplains layer, and the protected landscapes resilience layers of Conserve Virginia. And this was a great addition to the Crow's Nest Natural Area Preserve in Stafford County. And a quick recap of our other grants that we have open from FY18, there's 4, and they're all proceeding and should be closed by November 1 of this year. And then we have 18 open grants from last year's grant round. They're all moving ahead, and some of them are should close by the end of the year. So we'll report back to you on that at our next meeting. Thank you. Sharon, you'll be up next. I just have to get your presentation up.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Good morning, everyone. Sue's helping me get the presentation up. I hope everybody can see the presentation clearly. It is the traditional statement that I have shared with you previously. Okay. So good morning. We'll go over the different details of the financials and where we stand today with our funding levels. And for those that are new, we do not go over the entire statement because most of this is historical. The information that I'll be touching on today is going to be the differences or the changes of what we have processed through the fund since our last meeting in November. So it's been a little bit of time. So the first fund statement that you're seeing is our normal funding sources and that we have worked with for a very long time now. And so I'll talk about the changes that we have seen since November. So I'll start with the income section. And in the income section, I want to bring your attention to the fiscal or state fiscal year 20, which for those of you who may not be familiar, that ends June 30th of 2020. And during that time, since the last meeting, we received stewardship funds of $2.1 million. It's exactly $2,125,898. And we will be discussing that later in the meeting for your approval for those disbursements to go out. The next thing I want to bring your attention to is state fiscal year 21 appropriations. We've received to date $4.5 million. And then I'm going to go down to the interest section. And for the state fiscal year 20 interest, since the last meeting, we received the 3 remaining quarters of the fiscal year of interest in the amount of $111,000, bringing it to a total of $131,409 in interest in total for state fiscal year 20. And for state fiscal year 21 interest, to date, first quarter interest, which would be correct, that typically does not reach us until October. So the next section I will jump down to is the disbursement section. And for state fiscal year 20, stewardship payments went out in the amount of $1,507,000. So it was the full amount from FY19 that was approved in November of 2019. So during the last meeting, and since then we have put out the full amount. State fiscal year 21 stewardship payments, as I mentioned above, we have received the funding, but based on the meeting today and what is approved, we will then disperse those payments out after this meeting. State fiscal year 20 grant payments. There have been additional grant payments since the meeting last of $475,081, and for a total of $1,627,000 in grant payments for state fiscal year 20. State fiscal year 21 grant payments to date have only been at about $50,000. Now, this is not about funding that we've just received. These are payments that as they come to close, so those amounts may vary from what you see from Sue. State fiscal year 20 open space preservation DOF payment. We did send out the additional $562,500 in payments for the total of $1.1 million in total for their portion of VOF for state fiscal year 20. For state fiscal year 21, we have not processed the first payment for the first quarter, as we just received that $4.5 million, as I mentioned above, in the income section just yesterday. It was transferred to the agency. So we will be submitting that payment to VOF here shortly. For state fiscal year 20 administrative expenses, we had an additional $44,134 expended since the last meeting in November of 2019 for a total of $73,077 in expenditures administratively for the state fiscal year of 20. For state fiscal year 21 administrative expenses, so far to date, we have expended $11,320. This is the regular funding source. The next statement that I will be referring to, which is Sue, if you can advance. I did want to mention before we do move to the next statement, that leaves our balance at $13,202,882. So we have a very strong balance at this time in that fund. Sue, did you want to move to the next statement?
Sorry, Sharon, I'm trying.
Okay, that's okay. It allowed me the opportunity to talk about the ending balance.
I'm confused as to why it's not going. I don't know if this froze. Options.
It should let you advance to the next slide.
It's my arrow, right? I don't understand. Oh.
There you go.
Oh, there we go. Is that the
There you
second
go.
one? Okay,
Yeah,
sorry.
it is. That's okay. No, that's okay. We're all working through this. Okay. Thank you, Sue. So this is the restricted fund statement. This is a fund that we added to our foundation for the mitigation dollars that were received, as you see listed. And the same with this particular statement. Again, we leave historical information on there for comparison year over year, but what I'll focus on are the things that have happened since the last meeting in November of 2019. So I'll take your attention to the income section of this statement, and it will be mostly around the amounts of interest that we've received for state fiscal year 20, the interest. Since the last meeting, we received the last 3 quarters of the year and received another $90,792 in interest for a total of $131,408. For state fiscal year 21 interest, as noted in the previous funding, we have not yet received our first quarter interest. I'll bring your attention down to the disbursements for this fund. And so since this last meeting, we have had some grant payments go out for state fiscal year 20. There was a total of $40,907 dispersed in grant payments. Again, this may not correlate to exactly the year or some of the same information that Sue is putting out because of the timing of payments being distributed. They could be for different grants. State fiscal year 21 grants, to date, we have not distributed any of the grant payments. Again, this is only through August 31st because that is the most recent closed fiscal month that we have available to us. So there could have been payments since then that Sue is referring to. State fiscal year 20 administrative expenses, there was an additional $201,184 expended for a total of $206,739 for the year. And for state fiscal year 21, administrative expenses to date is $11,708 for a total of $6,111,975. Oh, $1 million. Oh, goodness, it's a tongue-tied morning, I believe, for myself. I apologize. $6,111,975 remaining in the fund. And so unless there's any questions, that is all I have to share and the standing of the finances as they are as of 8/31.
Okay. Okay.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Sue, do we have Gina up next?
One more. I'm gonna unmute myself.
You can talk to the phone too.
Okay, just talk to the phone. 1 second. We have one more item to take care of with dealing with our fiscal situation.
Gotcha.
The Code of Virginia sets out that we can spend interest from the Virginia Land Conservation Fund on staff expenses And so we have to bring this to the board as a resolution annually to be approved. And this year, DCR is requesting $190,000 to cover administrative and web-related grant expenses. So we suggest this for your consideration.
This is Lazaro. Move approval, Mr. Chairman.
Thanks, Bob. Is there a second?
Second, this is Kat Imhoff.
We have a motion and a second. Seems like good use of our money. Mike, will you call the roll, please?
Yes, sir. Mr. Pollard?
I'm a reluctant yes.
Mr. Ford? Didn't hear anything from. Mr. Ford? I see him there, but I don't. He's on mute. Mr. Ford, you're muted.
I think he said yes.
Okay.
Jay, did you say yes?
Yeah. Okay, thank you. Ms. Stiff?
Yes.
Mr. Volk?
Yes.
Dr. Casey?
Yes.
Ms. Imhoff?
Aye.
Ms. Booth?
Yes.
Mr. Presley? Mr. Woodley?
Yes.
Senator Marsden?
Yes.
Ms. Andrews?
Yes.
Mr. Beamer?
Yes.
Mr. Jennison?
Yes.
Secretary Ring?
Yes.
Mr. Lazaro?
Yes.
Secretary Strickler? Mr. Secretary, the motion carries.
All right. Thank you, Mike. Sue, what's next?
Okay, next we have the land preservation tax credit distribution of stewardship funds. This is all set out in section 58.1-513 of the Virginia Code in the tax section. And every year tax sends us the balance of the transfer fee that's collected when a landowner sells their tax credits. And this year, we received, you'll see here, the $2.1 million, which may be the most we've ever collected. And so we just wanted to share, this is a letter of notice we got from taxation. And now you can see here that at least 50% of the money that's collected has to go to the stewardship fund. And this year, DCR and tax used less than 50%. So the stewardship fund is getting more than 50% of the revenue that was collected, which is great. And this money can go to goes to land trusts and agencies that hold the easements on properties where landowners conserve their land and got tax credits. And Jean is going to present to you the list. Let me just bring that up.
All right, so Sue covered kind of a lot of that. If you look at your list, you'll see that 42 agencies and organizations will be receiving these funds this year. That's for a total of 545 donations over the past 3-year window that we're looking at. That half a donation is because the U.S. Navy holds one of the easements and they are not eligible to receive stewardship funds. No surprise, the Virginia Outdoors Foundation is in the most. They had 207 donations this year, and 3 other organizations had over 30 donations this year. That's Old Dominion Land Conservancy, Evergreen Team, and Department of Forestry. And that's all I've got to say on that. I think you all also received a copy of the Excel sheet via email to look through all the details yourself too.
This is Lazaro. Move approval, Mr. Chairman.
Is there a second? I hear some stuff from someone who's not muted, but I'm not hearing a second on that motion. Is there a second on Bob's motion?
I said that the only question is, do you need to vote to approve them, James? We're just in the back, correct?
I'm not sure that was second, but
Just say second.
all right, got it now. We're good to go. Mike, please call the roll.
Yes, sir. Mr. Pollard? Mr. Ford?
Yes.
Ms. Stiff?
Yes.
Mr. Volk?
Yes.
Dr. Casey?
Yes.
Ms. Imhoff?
I'm going to abstain for, as I work for the Piedmont Environmental Council.
Ms. Booth?
Yes.
Mr. Presley?
Yes.
Mr. Woodley?
Yes.
Senator Marsden?
Yes.
Ms. Andrews?
Yes.
Mr. Beamer? Mr. Beamer? Mr. Jennison?
Yes.
Secretary Green?
Yes.
Mr. Lazaro?
Aye.
Secretary Strickler?
Yes.
Mr. Secretary, the motion carries.
All right. Thank you. Any questions about any of that before we move on to the next agenda item? Okay. Well, Sharon, Gina, and Sue, thank you so much for those updates and getting us through that section of the meeting. Moving on, we know that there are multiple kind of concurrent grant rounds happening right now in Virginia on multiple programs. We've asked DCR and the Department of Forestry about 2 of the federal grant programs where VLCF funds are often used to leverage funding for bigger projects. One is the Forest Legacy Fund, and one is the Land and Water Conservation Fund. And we have Andrew Fatinos from DOF and Crystal McKelvey from DCR to tell us a little bit more about those ongoing programs. So, Andrew, I will turn it over to you first.
Thank you, Secretary Strickler. Can everybody hear me? Can I get a thumbs up if you can hear me? And is the audio quality good? Thumbs up? Oh, great. I've been running the Forest Legacy program for about 3 years, and would like to point out that the main reason I'm here today is because the Forest Legacy program can be very complementary to the VLCF program, combined together to undertake very large landscape scale projects. I'll try to keep my presentation brief and just hit some of the highlights. For those who aren't aware, the Forest Legacy Program is a federal grant program. It's focused on working forests, particularly those that are threatened to conversion to non-forest uses. The state forestry agencies of each state administer the program in their respective states, and the program is funded by LWCF. So, as you can see on the slide, Virginia does compete annually in a national competition. In the past, for the past 20 years, it's been an incredibly stiff competition. We compete with all states and territories. Fortunately, with the changes to LWCF funding, with the increases that we're expecting, we think that Virginia will have more chance than ever to increase the amount of funds. So can you advance the slide? And advance again. And one more time. For the past 10 years, Virginia's averaged about $1 million of FLP grant awards. And with the increase in LWCF funding, we think it's realistic to anticipate up to $2 million per year on average. The funding we do win is dependent on the quality of projects. So I'm here to encourage and that the state develop more and bigger projects than we have in the past, or we won't be able to take advantage of this new LWCF funding. The FLP can be used by state agencies to acquire wildlife management areas, state park expansions, new state forests, which we've used it for several times in the past. FLP is compatible with state conservation programs' new or renewed emphasis on equity. For instance, the Department of Forestry places a priority on new state forests that are in areas where there's little or no public land, or counties where there's not already a state forest or a state park. There's one such effort underway right now in Charlotte County. Can you go ahead and advance the slide, please? So this map shows two things. Completed FLP projects are the little stars, and the green area is the part of the state that's eligible for these Forest Legacy federal grant funds. I'm going to point out a couple clusters of projects. In the southeast part of the state, you'll see a cluster of stars. That shows our longleaf pine initiative efforts with DCR, Department of Wildlife Resources, the Nature Conservancy, and the Department of Forestry and other partners. We have a whole slew of federally funded projects completed down there. To the southwest corner of the map, you'll see a cluster that we partnered with the New River Land Trust in Grayson County to complete several projects about a decade ago. Looking towards the center of the state, in the south central part of the state, is our newest effort with the Forest Legacy Program, a partnership with the Conservation Fund, VLCF, Virginia Outdoors Foundation, and DCR LWCF. That's a new state forest in Charlotte County, along with several easements with nearby landowners. Can you advance the slide several more times? Thank you. So as we're looking for developing new projects and taking advantage of additional funds, we would love to work with partners on large scale projects, typically landscape scale, multiple tracts. A state entity, any of our state agencies can hold the fee or the easement. It doesn't have to be the Department of Forestry. It can be the U.S. Forest Service on initiatives such as filling in tracts along the Appalachian Trail corridor, or that's something we're investigating as a potential use of additional funds. Tracts must be 75% forested, and they must be within this green eligible area. And just one project can, one project can request up to $20 million in any given year. So the goal here is to think big, and we can leverage, $10, $15, $20 million matched with VLCF to undertake a very large project. That's also made possible because we can advance the funds prior to closing of any project. It doesn't work like a reimbursement. So the state doesn't have to have, $10 million on hand in order to close a project. This grant program allows them to be advanced ahead of time, which is a nice thing. So I believe that Secretary Ring may want to have a couple other comments before I wrap this up.
Thank you, Andrew. Really appreciate that presentation. I think it really gave a nice overview of the Forest Legacy Program, which has been in place for more than 20 years, and just the importance, the significance of this, and how we've been able to leverage funding, really bringing federal, state funding together along with private funding, nonprofit partners that have been involved in this. It's really tremendous when you look at what we've been able to accomplish, like with Big Woods, and just the unique partnership that we have there related to diminished ecosystems and longleaf pine restoration, and what we've been able to accomplish elsewhere in the state. And also, as Andrew said, we're beginning to really look at areas, gaps that we need to fill in the state, and knowing that we're beginning to move forward with some new projects like in Charlotte County. So we're very pleased with this. We're really excited about the additional funding that I think is going to make a huge difference, not only with Forest Legacy, but other stateside grants through LWCF. And so hats off to everyone that helped us get that additional funding. I look forward to moving forward in partnership, continuing our collaborations to make this good work happen on the ground. And then Larry Mickelson with DCR now, but Larry has been very involved with Forest Legacy over the years, and just want to thank him for his leadership and engagement as well. And Terry Lasher, who's also on the call today. Thank you.
This is Kat. Could I ask Secretary Ring a quick question?
Sure.
I wondered how this fit in with the Virginia Community Forest Program, if there's some way to leverage that.
Oh, you mean the Urban and Community Forestry Program?
Yeah.
The Community Forestry Program? I think that's what I'm understanding you say, Kat. And
yes,
I would like to actually also look to Andrew and Terry. Terry Lasher is the Assistant State Forester who oversees not only the Department of Forestry's Land Conservation Program, working with Andrew and the rest of the team. He's overseeing the Urban and Community Forestry Program, and that program as well has been in place for well over since the early 90s, actually. And the progress that we've been able to make with that, for example, it helped with the funding of the Crozet Tunnel and Clinch River Valley Initiative. We've been very engaged with that. And so I think that what we can do is to take important programs like that that can help on the planning side to help jumpstart a larger collaboration, if you will. That's a great way to really, I think, leverage these funds. And then what we're able to do to address equity, social equity, and working with all of our partners in urban areas and in small communities across the state, and really looking at, where do we have Forest Legacy dollars, where are there needs in certain communities, where do we have gaps, and how do we fill that? Terry, anything you'd like to add to that, or Andrew?
I'll add one more thing. There is a different U.S. Forest Service program that is focused on grants towards community forests in urban areas that are, Virginia's only won one of those, as far as I know, which was in Charlottesville 2 years ago. We helped with the application and put that together. So that is more focused on urban, but it is a separate grant program than Forest Legacy.
Thank you for that, Andrew. And I think one of the ways that we can start to bring forward some opportunities is to start looking at how we strategize, finding new pieces of property. And we can do that in conjunction with our urban and community forestry directors to identify places that might be a good fit for using some of the Forest Legacy funds. As Andrew mentioned, there are other funds available specifically to deal with some of the projects through the Forest Service. But I think if we start strategizing and looking at opportunities where we can focus on equity, then we can start to really maybe leverage some of these Forest Legacy program funding dollars there as well. It was a great question. Thank you.
Okay, so if there's, I guess, nothing else for Andrew, and Andrew, if you've finished with your comments, then back to DCR, but we appreciate the question, Kat, and just all of our partnerships that have really helped us leverage these dollars and be able to work hand in hand to have more impact on the ground.
Great. Thanks, Andrew. Thanks, Secretary Ring. Crystal, we'll turn it over to you now for the DCR.
Thank you very much, everybody, and I appreciate the opportunity to present. Can you hear me clearly? So I'm Crystal McKelvey. I'm the Recreation Grants Manager. I work for DCR under the Division of Planning and Recreation Resources with our Division Director, Kelly McClary. I do manage both the Recreational Trails Program, which is funding available through the Federal Highways Administration, and I manage the Land and Water Conservation Fund, which is funding from the National Park Service. I want to note on this slide, we have a new group email, recreationgrants@dcr.virginia.gov. So if you or any of your colleagues have any general questions about either of these programs, you're welcome to email it there and we'll respond to you promptly. Next slide, please, Sue.
It's frozen up again. Hold on.
That's okay. So we are excited to announce that as of September 15th, we have opened the grant round for Land and Water Conservation Fund with a focus on acquisition projects. This is one of our largest grant rounds with $8 million available in LWCF funding. The grant round is open from September 15th to December 15th, and you can go straight to our DCR LWCF website for all of the application materials, scoring criteria, manual, and more information. Eligible applicants are counties, cities, towns, park and recreation authorities, tribal governments, and state agencies. This list of eligible applicants is mainly due to the requirements that any property developed or acquired with LWCF funding must be kept in perpetuity for the purposes of public outdoor recreation. If an acquisition project does get funded, there must be public access within 3 years. Most grant agreements are 3-year agreements, and so you have a window to do that acquisition. For the application, you do have to have NEPA reviews in progress, appraisals to the Yellow Book required. So again, more information is on our website about all of the application requirements. It's a 50-50 match reimbursement program, so it's that you do have to have the funding up front, and then after all procedures, then 50% of the cost, the appraised cost, will be reimbursed. And I just wanted to touch on the fact of the Great American Outdoors Act. This has received a lot of interest. This was signed into law on August 4th of this year and received a lot of public information and news releases. This Great American Outdoors Act is very important, but there's 2 parts to it. One is for federal maintenance projects funding, and the other part is that the LWCF program will be funded in perpetuity. We have not yet determined what our 2021 apportionment will be, so this grant round is working with our 2020 apportionment and 2019 funding that was still on the table after our 2019 grant round, where we moved 7 acquisition projects forward. Some of them are still in motion with completing NEPA review, but that covered over $4 million in LWCF funding. And the last thing I want to touch on while I have your attention is that all, as I said earlier, all properties developed or acquired with LWCF stateside funding must be kept in perpetuity for the purposes of public outdoor recreation. So if you think that there's any previously funded LWCF 6F properties in your locality or area that may be having a conversion, i.e. some use of that property that is not public outdoor recreation, that must be reported to DCR. I'm the main contact for that, but DCR needs to be notified so that we can go through the due process with contacting that landholder and the National Park Service on the conversion process if that's on the table. So again, we're really looking forward to this huge grant round. The LWCF funds can be used with VLCF, and so we do often have applicants working on both of those, and I appreciate all the work of VLCF to continue communication with us and keep working on these great projects. Thank you.
Thank you, Crystal. Any questions from members of the board?
Sorry, this is Kat again. I guess I'm educating myself at this meeting, so thank you for putting up with me. I guess one of the questions I had is not about these two programs, but I'm really eager for Virginia to get as many federal dollars coming to our state as we can. And I wondered whether someone could also address NRCS, the AL project. I guess I was looking at 2018 stats, and we were 46 out of 52 states and territories in terms of dollars we brought in. And I think it's because we didn't have enough of ability to match. I may be wrong on all this, but I'd just be curious if there are other programs we should be thinking about in terms of bringing more resources to the Commonwealth.
Kat, I'll jump in, Secretary Strickler, if you're okay with that. I don't know if Diane Dunaway is on the call from the public from NRCS. She oversees that program. There are many folks that have been engaged in that program, and I think Jen Perkins is on the call from VDAX. But I think you make a really good point that we want to try to make sure we're leveraging as much of the federal funding that we possibly can. And I know there have been some challenges with that particular grant program that others can probably speak to much better than I can on the call. But how do we make sure that we have the state funding in place to really take advantage of that? And I think even if you look at the Forest Legacy program, we can bring in some significant federal dollars just with that, but may not have what we need as much for forest land in Virginia. So I think it really calls on all of us. How do we continue to look forward to the future and how we secure additional funding for land conservation in the state across the board?
Thank you.
Kat, I would just offer, Ring, thank you for that. I did have a call the other day with our new state conservationist for NRCS, Dr. Edwin Martinez, who has a lot of expertise in this area and has worked on the Great Lakes Restoration Initiative previous to coming here, so understands particularly the watershed scale planning that's necessary in the land conservation, importance of land conservation to those kinds of efforts like the Chesapeake Bay restoration work. So we mentioned specifically our lack of success in applying and securing funding from the various NRCS streams, and hopefully we'll be able to work through him to do better in the future. So appreciate the question. It's a great thing to bring up, and hopefully we'll have some more success soon.
Mr. Chairman, a quick question, a point of clarification. This is Elizabeth Andrews.
Elizabeth.
How are you? The presentation about the acquisition grants, the DCR presentation, you noted that I think cities, counties, state agencies qualify. Do regional public access authorities also qualify to get funding?
This is Crystal McKelvey, and it may be possible that they qualify, and I'm happy to look into that in more detail. Again, it's that capability to hold it in perpetuity, by a deed, by that authority. So I welcome you to email me some of the details of that if you would like, and we can look into that more carefully.
Thank you. Yeah, they're created by state code. So, all right, I'll send it to you.
They should be eligible, but I'll look at the details.
Thanks.
Great point. Any other questions for Crystal? Okay, if not, let's move on to talking about the 2020 grant round for the foundation. We've got a few items to go over there, some staff recommendations with a funding proposal that's based on the funding that's provided in last year's state budget. As you all are aware, the additional funding that the governor proposed and the General Assembly approved was unallotted. That would have taken us to the full $10 million for FY21 and 22. So that money is on ice pending the outcome of ongoing budget negotiations in the General Assembly. But we did in the base budget have $4.5 million that we feel comfortable at least putting out the RFP for on this grant round, and hopefully by the time we get proposals in and are ready to to talk about funding proposals, we will have that that money locked in and potentially some additional funding. But so that's the baseline that we're using for this grant round is the 4.5 million. We have a grant round timeline to consider for approval. And I'm going to propose that after we have board discussion on this, that we would vote on those two items and approve them in a block. And after that, we'll hear from Sue and Larry about some changes that are being proposed this year for the grant manual. I know that you all have received this. I know that there are a lot of kind of housekeeping changes in there, and I wouldn't want those to distract from the few substantive changes. So we'll have Sue and Larry highlight those, and I anticipate and hope there'll be some good discussion on that, because I think there are a couple of items that need a little bit of refinement by the board. So I just wanted to point out a couple of those big items. The first is that we're trying to and I think it's a goal of this board and certainly a goal of the governor, and I think staff has taken a good first run at trying to reach communities where VLCF grants have not traditionally been awarded in the past. There are a lot of underserved communities, both in rural and urban areas, where we need to increase public outdoor access, open space, and conservation of land. So that's one item that we'll be talking about a little bit. The second is to proposal to harmonize the VLCF grant standards with those of some of the other state environmental programs, including the conservation value review criteria that we've established and have incorporated into Conserve Virginia. So those are a couple of the big items I wanted to flag, but we'll first pass this over to Sue to kick off the discussion of the grant round proposals.
Okay, thank you. And these items have been mailed out to you all. This is the corrected version of our funding strategy of the $4.5 million grant round and how the funds would be divided up into the different categories. Pursuant to the code, VOF gets 25% off the top for their Open Space Lands Preservation Trust Fund, and then the remainder gets divided into our four VLCF categories. So you can see each category would get $843,750. There were no prior grant awards with leftover funds to bring forward this year, so it's pretty clean. And that is what we are presenting. The budget language that I included beneath, number one is for the grant round, and number two is just setting a placeholder for the stewardship funds that we talked about earlier. So if there's no questions about that, we can move on to the proposed timeline. Hopefully, okay. You all can see this on your screens. Oops, sorry. So we would, if the board approves the grant manual, today would kick off the grant round. We'd send out announcements this week, but certainly by next week, send out emails and post on our website notification of the grant round. We would have a grant workshop with our interagency task force in early October. And then The deadline we're proposing for grants to be submitted would be the end of 30th. So it's kind of tricky timing in the fall with the holidays, but this would be after Thanksgiving. And then we would have interagency task force meetings to score all of the applications in December, meet with the secretary and our director to go over the recommendations and propose board meeting in mid-January. And then we would, once everything's finalized, as far as the awards, staff would work to get
Okay. Any questions or conversation on the grant expenditure plan or the proposed timeline?
This is Lazaro. Move approval, Mr. Chairman.
Thanks, Bob. Is there a second?
Second from Jim
Woodley,
Casey.
second.
Thank you. Mike, will you please call the roll?
Yes, sir. Mr. Pollard? Mr. Ford?
Yes.
Ms. Stiff?
Yes.
Mr. Volk?
Yes.
Dr. Casey?
Yes.
Ms. Imhoff?
Yes.
Ms. Booth?
Yes.
Mr. Presley? Mr. Woodley?
Yes.
Senator Marsden?
Yes.
Ms. Andrews?
Yes.
Mr. Beamer?
Yes.
Mr. Jennison?
Yes.
Secretary Ring?
Yes.
Mr. Lazaro?
Yes.
Secretary Strickland?
Yes.
Mr. Secretary, the motion carries.
All right. Thanks a lot. Let's move ahead to Larry Mitchell for a discussion of the proposed grant.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
You do hear me? Okay, thank you. I will just give a brief overview, as has been mentioned, of the grant manual, just to bring some of the highlights to the board's attention. There are just some small organizational changes. The biggest things are that we separated the grant manual from the application to make it a shorter document, and it seemed to make the most sense. We also have a new Appendix A, which outlines some of the specifics of the grant program that previously had been scattered here and there throughout the manual, and we thought it was better to put them all in one place. That's on page 15. And within those specifications in Appendix A, there's one change. We removed the requirement, based on the advice of the Attorney General's office, we removed the requirement for an ALTA survey for fee acquisition projects. So that's a sort of a significant change. Moving on, I'll highlight three other things about the manual and then conclude. The first is in the open space and parks scoring on page 21. We added the opportunity for scoring to be given to critically needed new recreational opportunities. And also in the open space and parks scoring, there's an opportunity to provide points for underserved communities using the VIMS Social Vulnerability Index or other index that may be available. I think we'll hear a little bit more about that later today. And also an opportunity, if a project falls within any of the Conserve Virginia categories and provides daily public access, that they would have the opportunity for some points. Moving down to the second thing in the additional scoring on page 23. We have a new section called on protecting cultural resources like burial grounds and that type of thing in local areas. And we have added, again, an opportunity to get points for underserved communities in the social vulnerability index. That's on page 24. Lastly, there's some additions to Appendix D, some new resource protections, which would be requirements for ag or forestry plans on the property. Some tweaks and changes to a mowing requirement, depending on the width of the riparian buffer. And lastly, requirement for no earth disturbing activities within the riparian buffer. That's the highlights pretty much of what's been changed for this year, or what is proposed changes for this year, I should say.
Okay, Larry, thanks for that overview. There are a couple of things that I noted in here that I just wanted to get you to highlight for the group there. I believe there's some language that's been proposed to be removed in this version of the grant manual. One, dealing with conservation of land in densely populated or rapidly developing areas, and another talking about land that is currently under development threat. Would you be able to highlight those and talk about the rationale quickly for why those changes have been proposed?
Those are sections that were removed within the open space and parks category. Sue, can you help with some of that, please?
Sure.
Crystal?
We had, with a lens of trying to reach underserved communities, open space and parks seem like the best category that we could make changes to for reaching underserved communities, because the historic category is based on where the known historic resources are, and natural areas are for natural areas with high importance that we know about, and ag and forestry are where those important lands are. This category seemed like the one best fitted for trying to reach communities that we hadn't served before. And with taking out, and in looking at where VLCF funding has been spent in the past, a lot of it is in urban areas, and a lot of it has not occurred in Southern Virginia. And so we figured by removing the densely populated area requirement, it could help reach other areas of Virginia that haven't gotten our funding in the past. And then, since we're trying to reach new areas, we flip-flop the points in number 2 in the open space and parks category, so that you would get more points if it was a new critical or area to serve a critical need versus adjacent to an existing park. You still get points if you're adding on to an existing park. You get 5, but if it's going to serve a standalone park that's critically needed, you get 10 points. So I hope that answers your question.
It does, thanks, Sue. And those are a couple of different issues, and I want to get to the second one, I think, during the discussion. But as far as the first one, and Clyde, you made a good point on this when we spoke yesterday. The goal here is that even taking out this language on population density and rapid development, we're hoping that we, with the new criteria, or at least staff is proposing with the new criteria, that we would still be able to, or possibly be able to target better for underserved populations, and then also maybe remove a little bit of an element of I don't know if teaching to the test is the right term here, but folks putting properties up on the market because they know that they're in a quote intensely developing area. Clyde, maybe you can speak to that a little more articulately than I can.
Sure, absolutely, Mr. Secretary. Well, to your latter point, I actually am familiar with a couple projects where they were listed on the market. I don't know what the intent was for selling them, but they just coincidentally happened to be listed right as they were applying for land conservation money, and so that enhanced the score. And also the population density, issue, as Sue explained. Again, what we're trying to replace that with this proposal, and again, stressing this is proposal, that number one, we've added the ability for a new park area that may or may not be in a dense community, but that this concept that we would give additional points, and it's a total of 5 more points for a new park, and the language in here is, quote, critically needed to provide recreational activities. So that would help us to address a community that, whether it be densely populated or not, a community that does not currently have public outdoor recreational access. And then, again, at the end of the day, the bottom line still has to add up to 100 points. So, again, what we've done is focus that the 15 points now would go towards this underserved community. And I know, Mr. Secretary, you may be wanting to talk about that a little bit separately, but again, the scoring all fits together. And what we recommended was the VIMS Social Vulnerability Index. And one reason is that data is available statewide, but we also would allow the applicant to use some other form of index. There are some other models out there that a locality could use to help us determine how determine the benefit to the underserved community. And again, that scoring would provide up to 15 points if the community is very, very high in social vulnerability, and then it would be 10 points if it's high, 5 if it's a moderate, and then if it's a community with a low social vulnerability, it would not get any recognition under that particular scoring. And I think the other thing is that, I realize these are individual components, but at the end of the day, those on the call that have familiarity with the scoring process, that this all plays together, so that at the end of the day, the projects are all competing. And, so there may be a Code Serve Virginia, or there may be a public access to state waters value that sort of offsets some of these changes that are being proposed. I hope that answers that, Mr. Secretary. And if there's any other questions about the underserved community, also Deputy Director Nathan Burrell is on the line here, and he's much more familiar with those models that are available out there. Nathan, anything you want to add that I didn't cover as far as the underserved community proposal?
No, I think you covered a lot of it. And as staff was digging into this and wrapping our heads around, the equity issue in the outdoors related to VLCF, we started really looking at, models that were out there that were Virginia specific. And, unfortunately, there's not a whole lot of Virginia specific models right now that really speak to environmental justice communities or underserved communities. And that is why we gravitated towards the VIM Social Vulnerability Mapper. It is a statewide mapping tool that also takes into account a lot of the environmental justice criteria that would be associated with typical EJ tools. And so at this moment, we felt that the VIM Social Vulnerability Mapper is probably our best tool out there for this use, but also recognize that communities may have other mapping tools that they've developed. Richmond, for instance, has developed an environmental equity mapper that really speaks to, again, a lot of the attributes in the VIMS mapper, a lot of the attributes in EJ mappers. Communities like in Arlington, Northern Virginia, have developed mapping tools that allow them to understand better, where parks are needed in their community. But there's also models like Trust for Public Lands that uses 10-minute walkability that could be valuable as well. But again, those are more focused in urban areas. So to find a tool that really was able to be used statewide is why, again, we landed with the VIMS, Social Vulnerability Mapper in this area. But again, recognizing that, we needed to give communities the flexibility to be able to make the case. And that's why you see, the opportunity for the applicant to make the argument by showing other social demographics, community demographics, health demographics that really speak to the need for public access in their community.
Got it. Thank you, Nathan and Clyde. Is there any comments, questions, discussion from the board on these revisions, proposed revisions?
Yeah, this is Kat Imhoff. I guess I had a question a little bit about, and one of these is more for Nathan, but generally on the process part of this, how stakeholders have been consulted and brought into the conversation as you've been amending the guidelines. For example, I was thinking about the Black Family Land Trust is one. Equity has been just how you've been able to bring stakeholder groups into this update.
That's a really good question. There has been some discussions with Volt membership, around the need for not specifically how the grant manual would be updated, but the discussions around the need for equity and access to these type of programs. This has also been discussed quite a bit and is recommended in the Environmental Justice Council report that came out this past year. That really did kind of drill into the outdoor access piece of this and spoke to the need to update grant manuals to begin to, again, focus on better serving environmental justice and underserved communities. For this round, there was a lot of uncertainty as to if the grant round was going to happen and in what format it was going to happen. So at this juncture, the conversations with the broader community have not been, I think, as robust as I think we would all like, and hoping that through conversations today that some of this discussion will be had. But I do think going forward, the need for establishing kind of a ongoing working group that really comprises of not only state agencies but as well as community partners to continue the discussion around how do we improve not just this grant round but other grant opportunities that the state offers, and especially DCR offers, to ensure that we're meeting the needs of all Virginians.
This is Al, just a little bit. The scoring recognizes just density and ability to some of these parks. I feel like that's where the SDF and my tenure was really falling short. And having a small open green space, in a neighborhood can make all the difference. There was a good article, I think it was New York Times, that featured that, and obviously there's a lot of good work by Jeremy Hoffman and heat islands and the effect of trees on ameliorating that. And finally, I'd say that after this criteria gets adopted, hopefully gets adopted, that as you had mentioned, probably reaching out to some of the cities and some of the folks that really aren't in the VLCF world, so that they can know that these funds are now more likely to be available, that would change the scoring criteria.
No one else can either.
It was a bit challenging to hear a lot of what you said.
I'm agreeing with just say yes.
Very sorry. Does anybody else catch the comment or question?
Maybe Albert, you could put it in the comment section so we could all see it. Great.
Okay.
While Albert is typing that up, does anybody else have any questions or comments?
Mr. Chairman, this is Bob Lazaro. I think this is a good first step, and taking into consideration social vulnerability is a step forward for the Commonwealth.
Thank you, Bob. Anybody else?
Mr. Secretary, I just want generally and offer a suggestion for your consideration, and that's this year there's been tremendous work going into this grant manual, and thanks so much to staff and everyone else. I'm interested in a possible subcommittee of the land board moving forward that would meet between these annual meetings where we adopt the grant manual. Really, so there's opportunity for people to weigh in, board members to weigh in, and for board members to hear from our stakeholders in the land conservation community between these meetings. In the past, a few years back, we had an opportunity to sort of dig in on water quality section, Mr. And it was really instructive to me, and I think that opportunity being made available to other board members might be helpful and move forward.
This is Glenda Booth. I support that proposal, and I think it really helps us become more informed and engaged.
Jay, I think that's a really good idea. I'm not sure procedurally, and maybe Clyde or someone can help me out. If that's something that we need to address formally right now, or if perhaps we can chat about it a little bit offline in advance of the next meeting and have it be an agenda item for the next board meeting. I'm open to either way anybody wants to handle it.
Mr. Secretary, I think that our organization and bylaws would allow you as the chairman to appoint an ad hoc committee. We would, as we discussed yesterday, one of the biggest challenges in pulling this meeting together and even doing this meeting today is COVID-19. I would really entertain the opportunity to have perhaps an ad hoc committee of board members to help focus on this discussion we're having. Again, this is a staff recommendation that we've come up with some stakeholder input. I don't think we ever have had too much stakeholder input, so we would certainly welcome that. So perhaps what I would suggest, if this is okay with you, Mr. Secretary, if members are interested in serving in an ad hoc committee, if they could let you or me know, and then we could look at between now and when we might be doing another grant round, that we can look to, again, continue to refine these recommendations. It sounds like the board shares the goal, and sometimes it's just hard to know exactly how to get there. And I think what will be informative too is keep in mind, and Senator Marsden, hopefully the General Assembly is going to approve the additional $5.5 million that the governor proposed, and we'll have that available. So this grant manual will be for the specific $4.5 million we have right now. And then, we can always continue to make refinements as we would have another grant round, perhaps in the springtime.
I would hope that it would stay in the budget, Clyde.
Thank you.
All right. Well, Clyde, thanks for that. And Senator Marsden, certainly appreciate your support. That sounds like a fine approach to me. If folks who are interested in serving on such a subcommittee would just let Clyde or me know, then we can go ahead and get that set up in the near future. Are there any other questions or comments on this agenda item?
Yes, Mr. Secretary. Chairman. This is Elizabeth Andrews. Could you clarify for me again, what would be the purpose of the ad hoc committee to meet with all stakeholders, open to all? What is the purpose again?
Jay, maybe you can explain this. In my mind, kind of the shorthand is that this ad hoc committee would be put together to take inputs, not broadly but specifically on any updates to the grants manual, so that we have more robust stakeholder input into that process before the next round of changes.
Thank you, but my question is that it would be open to input from anyone about that, right? It's not targeted to certain group to hear input, right?
I think that's, sorry.
Ms. Sept, I was just going to answer that by saying that any subcommittee of the board would be subject to the Freedom of Information Act, and so we would certainly need to allow public input to any subcommittee meeting. But yes, I think ultimately that would be the goal, that we would be able to have a few board members that could roll their sleeves up and spend a little bit more time digging into some of these issues, and certainly receive input from the community and the stakeholders as we consider future amendments to grant manuals and the like.
Great, thank you, Clyde.
Okay. Thanks, Elizabeth. If there aren't other comments, or maybe even if there are, there's one proposal that I have for a minor, but I think relatively important language change to this manual, and it's on, I believe it's on page 14 of the new manual, and it's the second diamond, and this is under the open space and parks category, that currently reads, acquires an interest in land that creates new outdoor recreational opportunities or expands existing park systems or other recreational resources to protect public conservation or recreational interests. I think that the goal, as we've discussed here today, is to make sure that we are expanding these opportunities for communities that don't necessarily have them. And so what I would propose is that after creates new outdoor recreational opportunities, we would insert the words for underserved communities before or expands existing park systems. And that would align it, I think, better with the language that is down in the farther in the document on the additional points in the scoring section. If there's any discussion, or if I can clarify that, let me know. But that's one change that I think would be appropriate here.
Do you need a motion?
Yes, we would need a motion to amend the proposed draft.
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second, Mr. Chairman, this is Lazaro.
Thank you, Albert. Thank you, Bob. Any discussion on that motion before we take it to a vote?
Well, there may be other amendments, and I thought we were going to get public comment before we did. So if we could hold it and just do all amendments with the final approval, it would seem to make more sense to me than piecemeal.
Yeah, Mr. Secretary. Yeah, I think that would be appropriate, that we would be voting on it as amended through this discussion.
Great. Okay. Are there additional questions or comments? I apologize for bringing up the rear there, but there may be others. Okay. Do we at this point want to open it up for any public comment?
I believe there were 2 people that had pre-registered, Mike. Can they unmute themselves, or do you have to unmute? Okay. Want to call on one? Call on Parker first.
I think if Ellen Shepard is also on, she can go first if that's preferred.
Okay, sure.
Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. This is Ellen Shepard. We are maxed out with our bandwidth here, so I'm going to keep off my video, but good morning. I'm Ellen Shepard with Virginia's United Land Trust, and I think a lot of you know, but for those of you who don't, we are a network of more than 20 land trusts across the state. We work closely with local, state, and federal agencies involved in conserving Virginia's lands and waters, and we very much appreciate the opportunity for public comment today. there are a lot of challenges with online virtual meetings, and appreciate incorporating additional public comments throughout today. Thank you, and the chat function. And just want to echo a couple of the comments that have already been made. But one is we are all rooting that that $11 million is kept or returns to the budget so you can do even more much needed projects. And the $106 million in the pre-application projects last year demonstrated how much that is needed. I will say regarding the grant manual, I do think that the conservation community is still kind of processing what is included. And maybe going forward, it'd be really helpful to have a red line copy comparing what's the current copy and a revision. We do applaud the attention to the open space and parks category and emphasis on benefiting underserved communities. And just to follow up on Jay Ford's comment, we just would like to offer the expertise and experience of the nonprofit community in that task force going forward. Thank you so much for having the opportunity for public comment today. That's it, thanks.
And my name's Parker Agelasto. I'm the Executive Director for the Capital Region Land Conservancy. And I too just want to thank the board of the Virginia Land Conservation Foundation for what you all are taking on today in establishing the amended criteria. Like Ellen, we are going to continue to work to encourage the full funding for VLCF. We also, like was said earlier, are going to continue to try to leverage these dollars on any projects so that we are tapping into more federal dollars, whether that's for urban projects, rural projects, whether it's for battlefields or forests. I would like to say as well that I'm very pleased to see the criteria have amended language to address some of the equity issues that I had seen previously in VLCF grant rounds. When we did our pre-application last year, it became very apparent to me that the parks and open space category, the way that it was scored was disadvantage to low-income communities that previously had no access to public parks. The lowest scoring project in the city of Richmond, and it was for a 13-acre park that would have increased public access to about 2,000 residents who otherwise did not have a park within a 10-minute walk. And of that, it was about 80% African American and more than 50% living below the poverty line. So I highly commend you all for making the revision here. I also want to echo great appreciation for the Secretary and for Director Chrisman for recommending moving forward with a work group that can evaluate the VLCF criteria for future grant rounds and bringing together stakeholders and others that might have some other insights that could be shared in this regard. As Ellen Shepard mentioned, the practitioners who conduct a lot of land conservation as the nonprofit sector, we see ourselves as strong partners with all of the state agencies in accomplishing the Commonwealth's goals, particularly Governor Murphy's goals for Conserve Virginia. So we look forward to being an integral partner in that regard. And thank you again for your time and for your commitment here. And we look forward to future relationship building.
Thank you, Parker, and thank you, Ellen. It's good to hear both of you, and certainly appreciate all of your hard work and partnership with us and others on behalf of Virginia's environment. I guess we'll see if there are any public comments in the chat.
No, we don't see any in the chat.
Okay, any additional conversation from the board on the proposed revisions to the grant manual? Okay, so go ahead.
Excuse me, there were Albert Pollard's comments that when we couldn't understand what he was saying, perhaps have density and population that can walk as a criteria by staff. Also make sure that you can tell cities that this money is available. It will be an iterative process to improve and make it more workable over time.
Gotcha. Thank you.
Yeah.
Would Sue or Clyde, would you care to respond to that comment?
This is Albert.
Oh, hey, Albert.
This is Albert. It was for when staff are, we have the social vulnerability index or other criteria that may be forwarded. So it's not a formal motion. I think in the future grant rounds, we should make it, a walkability index.
Gotcha. Okay, thanks for that. So we've got a motion on an amendment properly seconded before us. Should we decide on that first and then take a decision on the manual revision in full?
Mr. Secretary, since we just have that one amendment, I think that the motion would be appropriate that the draft be approved with that one amendment. We could do that in one roll call vote, I think.
Okay. Does the previous motion need to be withdrawn first?
Mr. Chairman, I'll withdraw the motion and remake the motion as amended.
Second the motion as amended.
Great, thanks. We got a new motion properly seconded before us. Any discussion on that motion? All right, Mike, will you please call the roll?
Yes, sir. Mr. Pollard? Mr. Ford?
Yes.
Tiff?
Yes.
Mr. Volk?
Yes.
Dr. Casey?
Yes.
Ms. Imhoff?
Aye.
Ms. Booth?
Yes.
Mr. Presley? Mr. Woodley?
Yes.
Senator Marsden?
Yes.
Ms. Andrews?
Aye.
Mr. Beamer?
Yes.
Mr. Jennison?
Yes.
Terry Ring?
Aye.
Mr. Lazaro?
Yes.
Secretary Strickland?
Yes.
Mr. Secretary, the motion carries.
All right, great. Thanks everybody for working through that. We've got 3 more agenda items that I think we can get through relatively quickly. I hope we'd be able to wrap it by noon. We're not going to quite get there, but understand and want to be respectful of people's time. So let's move quickly into the next item, which is kicking off a second grant round for awarding available funds from the 2017 Skiffs Creek project settlement, and Linda Crow with DCR has been administering these grants and is going to give us an update on the past awards and the current proposal. Linda.
Thank you. Good morning from sunny Richmond. As a quick overview, these are the Dominion grants for the Surrey Skiffs Creek Power Line. The Virginia Land Conservation Foundation received $12.5 million of restricted funding to mitigate for the adverse impacts of that overhead power line at Jamestown. The grants are governed by a memorandum of agreement between the Army Corps of Engineers, Dominion, and other stakeholder signatories. The primary focus areas were 1, battlefield conservation, with emphasis on the Yorktown battlefield and Fort Crawford, and then the development of public interpretive materials and signage and exhibitions. 2, landscape preservation, with emphasis on projects within the James River watershed benefiting historic properties. And then 3, landscape scale conservation projects that lead to precluding future river crossings and non-compatible shoreline development within the areas of potential effects of that power line. So quickly, I'll tell you, we can skip to, well, that's a picture of the governor and the chief of the Chickahominy Indian tribe at property that was acquired with this grant money. And in 2017, this board approved grants in the amount of $12,390,600. They did not allocate $109,400. That was left over, and we'll talk about that in a sec. But the Chickahominy on the Powhatan was 400 acres that was acquired by the tribe. The easement is held by the Virginia Outdoors Foundation. That project closed. Bell Mead on the James project is not going to be able to proceed. It was acquired by a private landowner and who is not interested in an easement at this time. So that money has come back into the fund and is available for future grant rounds. The Yorktown battlefield property that DCR got is underway, and so that money is still in play for that project. Malvern Hill closed, Parker, and we contributed $200,000 from this fund toward that project. Battlefield Bluffs at Yorktown, that also closed. That's an American Battlefield Trust acquisition with an easement held by Department of Historic Resources. They have two other grants, Colonial Williamsburg Tract and the Egger Tract. Colonial Williamsburg is under contract, and the Egger Tract probably will be very shortly. Those grants have been extended to account for some delays of game due to this virus, among other things. Okay, and then there were two interpretive grants to Inview Plantation and Newport News. They are about to complete their grant, and that will be done in November. They've developed new interpretive exhibits, and some of those are actually up at this point. And then Fort Eustis and the College of William and Mary partnered on to create a 3D virtual model of historic Fort Crawford using a LiDAR technology and field work as well. So that's going to give the public the opportunity to see what that fort might have looked like back in the day. And so that is the update on existing projects. And again, the amount allocated was $12,390,600, with money that has revolved back into the fund, and money that was left over after the completion of the Chickahominy Tribes project. We now have available for new projects $1,145,829. Any questions? Okay, then we're going to roll into our proposed 2020 grant round with the remaining funds. And we just went over the amount that's available. And so we'll go over the proposed timeline, which is eerily similar to the one that Susan just presented for the 2021 VLCF grant rounds, with a couple of key exceptions. Our grant application deadline is October 30th of this year. The projects will be ranked on the same time frame. In late November, the secretary and the director will look at the review of the top scoring projects. And in early December, we anticipate having a virtual VLCF board meeting to approve or discuss and hopefully approve the proposed projects. And then if all goes well, by early 2021, these properties, these agreements would be, these grants would be under agreement, and they'd have 2 years to close. Any questions? Thank you.
Hey, thank you, Linda. If there are no questions, we need to take action to approve the amount of funding available and the timeline Does anybody have any comments, or is there a motion on that?
Hi, this is Sue, and I just wanted to point out that for this grant round, we're using the same grant manual that was approved back in 2017 by Dominion and the Army Corps and VLCF.
It's a good point, and the biggest reason for doing that is if we had to go back and revise that with the Army Corps, we might not be able to get this money out the door in the next decade. So that's what we're working with. All right,
Chairman. Go ahead.
No, I was just going to ask if there's a motion on this.
This is Jim Beamer. Before you make the motion, I have a question. As an employee of Dominion Energy, should I abstain or am I allowed to vote on this?
Jim, that's a great question. Clyde, do you have any advice?
Yes, sir, Mr. Chairman. When in doubt, abstain, Jim. I would recommend that would be appropriate.
Clyde, will you be able to get me an answer for future votes?
Yes, absolutely. We do have counsel online, but again, there's no harm in you abstaining.
Mr. Chairman, this is Bob Lazaro. Move approval.
Thanks, Bob. Is there a second?
Second, Mary Carson Stiff.
Great, thanks. Mike, will you please call the roll?
Yes, sir. Mr. Pollard?
Yes.
Mr. Ford? Ms. Stiff?
Yes.
Mr. Volk?
Yes.
Dr. Casey?
Yes.
Imhoff?
Yes.
Ms. Booth?
Yes.
Mr. Presley?
Yes.
Mr. Woodley?
Yes.
Senator Marsden? Ms. Andrews?
Yes.
Mr. Beamer?
Abstain.
Mr. Jennison?
Yes.
Secretary Ring?
Yes.
Mr. Lazaro?
Yes.
Secretary Strickland?
Yes.
Mr. Secretary, the motion carries.
All right, great. Thank you. Thanks for those updates. And the next item on the agenda is discussion and approval, hopefully, of the LCF request for grant pre-applications, which is a requirement of legislation that was passed to General Assemblies ago. So Sue and Larry, I will kick that over to.
This pre-application manual is very similar to what we did last year. We have proposed a couple of changes to open space and parks categories to reflect the recently approved manual. Streamline application for land trusts and state agencies to give the General Assembly a view into the need for funding for land conservation throughout the state. Larry, was there anything in particular that you wanted to point out?
I just wanted to mention that we're proposing Friday, October 30th as the deadline, which is a month prior to the regular grant round.
So the timeline for this, we've proposed, yeah, here's the timeline. I've just posted it. We would have these pre-applications due earlier so we could process this in time to get the report to the General Assembly by December 15th as required in code.
Mr. Secretary, if I could also, Ms. Stiff had asked a question in the chat earlier that I waited till now to address. by approving, if you see in this this proposed grant manual, it is much simpler and more streamlined for these pre requests, and they don't specifically require approval of the board like a project that's actually getting funding. So the purpose of this exercise is that we are actually gathering data and information on what projects are out there for future. And as a matter of fact, there may be some projects that were in last year's list that are now going to be coming before you later for funding. So the board doesn't have to actually approve this. When you approve the this manual, you're approving the scoring process, and then it's pretty straightforward. We are only presenting the scoring to the General Assembly as required by statute. So that just to make sure that does that answer your question, Ms. Stiff, that you didn't, there's not an actual approval process. It's just where we report all of what we get and how they score on the matrix that's before you right now.
Yes, thank you so much for clarifying.
Okay, great, thanks. Any further discussion on this item? We need board action to approve the grant manual and to approve the timeline. Is there a motion?
I think this is
I heard something, but it wasn't clear to me what exactly was said.
I think I heard Albert make a motion.
Well, actually, Wendy, there is a comment in the chat about an error on page 4 of the pre-application manual.
Okay.
So Wendy Musumeci from Department of Historic Resources noted that we should take out a phrase and designate it as a National Historic Landmark, 10 points. It should be struck because it was removed from the scoring criteria in the revised grant manual. We can make that change. Page 4, I'll go to page 4 if I can figure out how to get back to that. Let's see. Okay, so we could just delete Wendy, is this what you wanted us to delete, the whole, what I've highlighted on the screen?
Yes.
Okay.
And they'll be 10 points short of 60 points. So I'm not sure what you want to add back in there to get 10 points. Something else from the category scoring criteria.
How did we line that up in the grants, the broader grants manual?
Now these points are different.
So it's
Do you have a suggestion, Wendy?
I'm not sure that it aligns with the current changes. If it's listed, it's 25 points. If it's a battlefield, it's 25 points. So I think there's some other inconsistencies in this with what's in the revised scoring criteria.
Yeah, I was going to raise this issue and sent an email early this morning, just trying to understand, how much the two documents are supposed to marry each other or be married. So I think that it might be helpful just to know what the expectations are for them to be perfectly matched, because there are some inconsistencies across the board in terms of scoring. And I understand that the purpose of each document is different. And so maybe it doesn't matter that they're inconsistent, but just a little guidance for those of us voting on it, not wanting to do anything to create confusion or to vote something that isn't consistent that should be.
Yeah, it's a good point, Clyde. What's the objective here from you and your team on the proposal?
Mr. Secretary, I would say that there is no need for these to sync up with when we're making a decision on awarding funding. It's a whole different process. This process is merely to be able to demonstrate to the General Assembly the need out there and how it compares. So I don't see a problem with leaving this in at this point in time, because it's going to mess up the scoring, and then we can come back and continue to evaluate that. But I don't think there's a need that the actual VLCF grant scoring criteria lines up with this again, this is really for the purpose of letting the General Assembly know what the need is out there in the world, or in the Commonwealth for future land application projects. So I don't think that this is a problem, that this is different.
This might be a good issue to discuss at our first meeting of that committee, because it might be the case that someone who's working at a land trust and proposing a project might say, well, this is the biggest headache ever. So maybe having everything be married up would be more helpful, or maybe they'll say it's no big deal at all because they have their own scoring criteria that they're applying on the back end. So I think it'd be good to hear from folks that will do the application in the future.
Yeah, that's a good point. I think my question is, why do we need to include points at all in this particular document?
Well, Mr. Secretary, the requirement in the statute is that we have to report to the General Assembly. I think it uses the term ranking, that we have to report as to, with the amount of money, how the projects rank. And Sue, is that a good summary?
Yes, we do have to present a ranked listing, and so we picked some categories from each, some criteria from each of the categories to come up with a ranked list. So we could do it expeditiously, as well as pull out some of the key standards from each of the categories.
Gotcha. So the idea here, right, is that this is a kind of a less granular filter, just kind of a first cut to take a look at what's out there, and then the criteria in the grants manual would be to further refine and further kind of winnow down what the best and highest ranking projects are for actual funding. Is that an accurate way to describe it? Given that, and given Mary Carson's good something that the subcommittee would take up, are there any other questions or comments on this item? Hearing none, is there a motion?
So moved.
Adoption is moved. Is there a second?
Second.
All right, Mike, please call the roll.
Mr. Pollard?
Yes.
Mr. Ford? Ms. Stiff?
Yes.
Mr. Volk?
Yes.
Dr. Casey?
Yes.
Ms. Imhoff?
Yes.
Ms. Booth?
Yes.
Mr. Presley?
Yes.
Mr. Woodley?
Yes.
Senator Marston knows that he had to leave.
Yeah, he said he had to sign off.
Ms. Andrews,
Yes.
Mr. Beamer,
Yes.
Mr. Jennison,
Yes.
Secretary Ring,
Yes.
Mr. Lazaro,
Yes.
Secretary Strickler.
Yes.
Mr. Secretary, the motion carries.
All right, great. Thank you, Mike. Thanks, everybody. Last kind of business part of the agenda is a briefing from our Deputy Director Nathan Burrell on the Virginia Council on Environmental Justice. As you all may or may not know, Nathan served on the council before his appointment by the governor to his current position, so has a wealth of knowledge and about what the council has been doing, and certainly we're working hard with Nathan and Clyde and their team to build some of these environmental justice and equity considerations into all of our environmental programs statewide, but certainly within DCR and the land conservation program. So Nathan, I will turn it over to you.
Thank you, Secretary Strickler. Hello, everyone. Thank you all for taking your time out of your busy schedules to be here for today. I know this is a bit of a long meeting, and I'm probably standing in between you and lunch. So I'll make this brief, but allow for some time for discussion afterwards if there is any. And yes, it has truly been an unprecedented year for the environment and environmental justice here in Virginia. With the leadership of Secretary Strickler and Governor Northam, the Department of Conservation and Recreation worked to update our Conserve Virginia model. We're now in Conserve Virginia 2.0. And this really is kind of, one of the premier tools that is being used for conservation, not just here in Virginia, but I would dare say in the United States. Virginia is a model for how land-based conservation and access to recreational amenities can be afforded through the lens of, of true mapping tools that get us to a point where we're really looking at land needs across the board. And one of the biggest updates that happened as a part of that was the addition of 130,000 acres that have been brought into the Conserve Virginia model. That really focuses in on battlefields, Civil War battlefields that were used by United States colored troops. This, again, truly is an unprecedented change in the way that we are looking at historic justice and equity as it relates to the history and breadth of things that have taken place here in Virginia. So that really is kind of this, we should all be patting each other on the back for this update. You can go to the next slide. I mean, as I mentioned, environmental justice really took forefront here in Virginia over this last council session. And one of the things that really kind of came to the forefront was put out by Governor Northam, EO 29, Executive Order 29, which reestablished the Virginia Council on Environmental Justice and established it through January 22nd on 2019 was when that EO came out. And this effort really did start to bring in an understanding that the environment and the outdoors and access to the outdoors is a critical piece to environmental justice, and didn't just focus in on some of the more traditional ways that we think about environmental justice of general, are we putting facilities that cause harm to communities in environmental justice communities instead of looking at globally where these facilities are needed and not just shoehorning them into certain communities. At the same time that EO 29 was established and the commission was starting to kick off, the General Assembly started. And the 2020 General Assembly session really pushed environmental justice to the forefront and gave a little bit more legs to EO 29, quite honestly. You can go to the next slide. House Bill 1042 permanently established the Virginia Council on Environmental Justice as an advisory body to the executive branch with a sunset of July 1st, 2023. That's important because no longer does each governor have to reestablish year after year the Environmental Justice Council. Now this is a standing body that is there to not only advise the executive branch, but also there to be assistance to all of our state agencies if there are needs and understandings related to environmental justice and how our organizations and our agencies can really start to drill down on this effort. At the same time, Senate Bill 406 established the Environmental Justice Act, and this further established the meaning of environmental justice and what constitutes an EJ community, as well as what does it mean to be populations of color. This also directs the secretaries and state agencies to develop policies and strategies to incorporate EJ and environmental justice into mission-specific ways. And so that's really, where we're starting to have these conversations around environmental justice and access and how underserved communities not only access in the traditional sense of outdoor spaces, but how are environmental justice and underserved communities accessing programs and opportunities that not just DCR has to offer, but that other state agencies have to offer as well. And this, the Senate bill also establishes an interagency EJ work group to further integrate and coordinate EJ efforts across state agencies. So we're working currently with the Secretary's office to begin to establish the interagency and environmental justice work group, again, to further ingrain environmental justice and work in underserved communities into just the everyday workings of our agencies. This is no longer expected to be additional work. This is expected to be just a part of the work that we do and how we carry out our mission. Next slide. As I mentioned, this year's Virginia Environmental Justice Commission brought into the mix outdoor access. As Secretary Strickland mentioned, I was a part of the Environmental Justice Council, and I did chair the Outdoor Access Subcommittee prior to my appointment as Deputy Director for the agency. And I wanted to highlight a couple areas here. The Public Access Subcommittee, we're charged really with and felt that our mission was that public space should serve everyone. Equal and equitable access to these spaces and natural areas is critical to fostering healthy communities. I mean, that really speaks to the mission of our agency, but also I think really speaks to the care and considerations that many of you have on this call today, and why you are part of this board. One of the biggest things that that was pointed out, you'll kind of see there in some bullet points, and I'll go into in a little bit of depth. The need to update some tools that we have. Currently, we use and is a part of our Conserve Virginia mapper tool. We also have recreational access models, ones that are for terrestrial access as well as aquatic access. We've recognized that that tool also needs an update. We're seeing that in some of the areas, especially, if I'm going to use South Richmond kind of as a case in point, as we were looking at our recreational access model, terrestrial access model, if you drill down to Southside Richmond, it would show that the needs were met as far as public access. Well, I can tell you that the city just released a study and have now implemented the need for 5 new parks in Southside of Richmond. And that is based off of Trust for Public Lands, 10-minute walkability mappers, as well as the equity index that was developed by the city itself. And so you see those discrepancies in mapping tools that we're currently using, and also this gives us an opportunity to update those tools, really get input from local communities, finding out exactly where they're looking to install new parks, where parks currently have been built that maybe we don't know about, where new spaces are planned. We're really starting to look at how we are providing recreational amenities across the board equitably to communities here in Virginia. One that we've talked about quite a bit here are updates to grant manuals. This is not just speaking to VLCF grant manuals, but this is talking about RTP grant manuals. This is talking about Forest Legacy grant manuals. So really thinking about more holistically how grant funds and opportunities that we as a state or pass-through funds that we are not able to deploy really are able to be used and deployed more equitably across the state. So I'm very proud and happy that we're having this discussion. The last is access for all. And access for all really starts to take into account how are we ensuring that we're meeting the need as a state agency. We say in our Virginia Outdoors Plan that we want to ensure that all Virginians have access to a state park within an hour access or hour drive. Well, we need to make sure that that's possible. We need to look at and assess gaps. We need to also ensure that there's opportunities for communities to not only access these spaces in a more consistent manner, but ways that we can ensure that communities that are not close to one of these facilities, are there ways that we can provide grants that allow those communities to have transportation that bring them into a state park or a national area preserve or other state amenity that's open for public access. But this also gets to the question of access fees. Many of our state parks, especially those that are close to urban environments and large populations, it costs more to get into those parks. For instance, Pocahontas State Park, during peak season, it's $10 just for you to access the park. Now, mind you, there's a lot of other things that you could do in the park that you also have to pay for. If you want to go to the pool, you got to pay. If you want to rent a kayak or a canoe, you got to pay. But what we want to ensure is that all Virginians are able to access these facilities without the burden of a $10 fee or a $5 fee. Mind you, we're paying taxes, and so ensuring that the public has full access to these spaces unencumbered, really starts to get to the equity issue of being able to ensure that these public spaces are usable by all. Next slide. I'd be loath if I did not speak to the efforts that our agency are currently going forward with under the leadership of Director Chrisman of really focusing in on diversity, equity, inclusion as it relates to our agency and as it relates to the programs and activities that we do agency-wide. And so we've really focused on ensuring that not only do we have representation from all of our divisions within our committee, but also ensuring that we're looking at equity level reviews for each of our programs, ensuring that all Virginians have access to the programs and opportunities that we have. Accountability measures. We want to ensure that we're moving the needle. We want to make sure that we are providing access to all Virginians. And how are we going to do that? And we're going to do that by making sure that there are benchmarks set to show that not only are we reaching these communities and making contacts with these communities, but that we are working very closely with these communities to again have them understand the opportunities, but be able to take advantage of these opportunities. And learning is a big piece of this. We all have deficiencies and we all have things that we need to work on. And learning agency-wide has really become kind of one of our focus of really understanding where our biases are, how we can correct those biases, but also just how we can be better as an agency. Next. Next slide. And I'll end with this. Our mantra for the agency has really become listen, learn, act, repeat. We're listening to each other. We're listening to our partners. We're listening to community members, but we're also listening to the things that are happening out there in our environment. We're learning about our own biases, about biases that our agency and our programs may have had in the past, and we're learning how to be better. But most importantly, we're starting to act on those. We are acting. We're not sitting back on our laurels waiting to be informed or for someone to tell us, hey, you need to start doing this. We see that not only that there are inequities in the way that people are able to access community spaces in the environment, but we also recognize that the need to move forward cannot wait at this point. And we also recognize that this is not going to be a one and done. It's going to take repeated action. It's going to be taking us to repeatedly listen to each other, to learn from each other, and to act with empathy. And that's where we are as an agency, and that's where we hope that our supporting agencies, our supporting partners, as well as our community continues in this effort and down this path. Thank you all for your time.
Excellent. Thank you, Nathan, for that overview. You and everybody over at DCR are doing great work in this space, and we really appreciate it. Any comments or questions from the board on that topic?
This is Glenda Booth. I know time is running out here, and I would like to discuss this at another time, perhaps offline with Nathan. But first of all, I appreciate your putting this on the agenda and for giving us this briefing. This has been an issue I think I've raised with the board, and I think this is all a very positive development. One of our categories is historic area preservation, and at some point, I hope we can talk about that, because I think, we need to do more in that category to recognize underserved communities in the history of our state. Again, we can revisit this later, because I know we've now been on the phone for 2 hours and a half. So thank you very much.
Thanks, Glenda. Anyone else? Okay. Any additional comments or questions from the board members?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, this is John Paul Woodley, if I may be recognized.
Yes, sir.
Mr. Chairman, Madam Secretary, I have completed my term on the board and am holding over my second term on the board, and am holding this position pending the governor appointing my replacement. So this is very likely to be my last meeting with you as a board member. And I just want to take this opportunity to express my appreciation to you, to Director Chrisman, and to all the members of the board and staff for what has been a wonderful opportunity for me, and to commend the staff and the members for the work that they have done over the last 8 years that I've been in attendance of these meetings. We've made marvelous improvements in our processes, which were already very good, and made a big difference, I think, in many communities across the Commonwealth. And so, with that, I wish you, the board and the foundation, every continued success with the future.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes, sir.
This is Bob Lucero. I'd just like to, as well, thank you, the staff, all my fellow commissioners. I too, my time is up on a commission, and I suspect that a replacement will be named before the next meeting. I think I did some quick math over the last 8 years or so. We protected more than 20,000 acres of valuable property here in the Commonwealth, and I commend you and everyone involved. I'm like John Paul, I was around long for us to spend it all in these grant rounds, and I deeply appreciate the commitment of the Northam administration and the McAuliffe administration for putting the money forward to make this happen. It's an evolving process. It's been an honor to serve, and appreciate all the good work that you're doing. Thank you.
Well, Mr. Woodley and Mr. Lazaro, thank you for continued service to the Commonwealth, and certainly it's been a pleasure to serve with you on this board, and appreciate everything you've done for land conservation and to help me out in this role. So thanks again. Anyone else? I think I'm correct about this, but we don't have any additional public comments. Can staff check on that quickly?
That's correct.
All right. then I guess I would move to adjourn the meeting. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Cheers. Take care.
Have a great day, all.
Thank you.
Well.